Welcome to the Industrial Podcast, a podcast all about the Industrial Revolution. I'm Kendal, and in today's episode, we'll be chatting about how advancements in new industries, specifically steel, chemicals, and electricity, led to new possibilities in production. I will explain how advancements in transportation and communication affected trade, migration, and global interactions. I will also identify and explain the steps that the newly created state of Germany used to become the industrial rival of Great Britain, and how this state helped to promote industry within its borders. Also, how its approach differed from Britain. I am also going to identify and explain ways in which industrialization impacted imperialism in the 19th century. And after that, we'll compare the response of China and Japan to threats of foreign industrial powers during the 19th century and what contributed to that success or failure. I hope you enjoy! The advancement of new industries such as steel, chemicals, and electricity during the Second Industrial Revolution led to an array of new possibilities, not only in production, but in our daily lives. For example, the advancement of steel and electricity produced goods could now be done in mass quantities, with large factories and electrical companies now needed to hire more employees. This led to an influx in jobs in those industries. And of course, we have to get those people to their jobs, so we saw an upward shift in public transportation, such as trains. Additionally, we saw the telegraph introduced, and this made it easier for people to communicate. So now we have goods, people, and jobs created to make those goods, and a way to chat with our friends and family about our jobs and goods. All in all, the Second Industrial Revolution really jump-started not only consumer goods, but our society as a whole and how we interacted with one another. During this time, the newly formed states of Germany began their rise to industrial success, making competition for the leading power of the time, Great Britain. The first step Germany did was remove internal boundaries and start by making a solid nation. Introducing a new unified currency also helped with this. Initially, Germany followed similar European nations in their way of industrialization, though this wasn't how they became successful industrial powers. They eventually shifted to chemical and electrical industries, and because they were on the forefront of these industries, they became major players. Though Germany was able to become a rival of Great Britain by shifting their focus to research and product development, as opposed to growing their empires through imperialism like Britain. In no time at all, they were level with Britain in their own industrial powerhouse. Advancements in transportation and communication affected trade and migration by increasing how easily it was to trade and transport goods and people, and facilitate power over those new colonies. For example, railroads and steamships. Railroads were used by Americans to transport forced labor, raw resources, and created products throughout Latin America. It also made it easier for America to transport their goods across this large land to water exports. In the same way, steamships were used to transport goods and people from continent to continent. Industrialization impacted imperialism by increasing the need for imperial efforts. Essentially, imperialists were looking for cheap, if not free labor, as opposed to earlier explorers and settlers looking for territory. They needed land, resources, and workers. Imperializing other nations was the perfect way to get these things. They used enslaved people to work in their factories and export their goods, often in dangerous and horrible conditions, though their own citizens also faced these conditions. Both industrialization and imperialism focused on building a state's economy and power. China greatly opposed industrialization, specifically Western influence for many reasons, but mainly they didn't see the need for goods offered by countries like Great Britain. Great Britain, however, very much wanted goods from China, as well as opportunities that came with their trade. In an effort to force China into trade with Great Britain, purposely inflicted Chinese citizens with opium addiction. They illegally produced and imported opium into China and sold it to their citizens. Because their weak economy, European nations were able to divide China's trade opportunities through spheres of influence. Japan, however, was completely different. They welcomed industrialization and Western efforts on their own, though it may have influenced their choice to avoid forced Western influence. This worked amazingly for Japan, and they would later become one of the world's top industrial powers. China, however, had a bad economy and forced industrialization that they didn't get to reap the benefit of. That's all for this episode of the Industrial Podcast. To recap, today I talked about the Second Industrial Revolution. I talked about advancements in new industry, like steel, chemicals, and electricity, and how they led to possibilities in new production. I explained advancements in transportation and communication and their effects on trade, migration, and global interaction. I talked about the newly created state of Germany and how they became rivals with Great Britain, the steps they used, how they promoted industry within their borders, and what different approach they took. I also identified and explained industrialization impact on imperialism. And lastly, I talked about China and Japan and how they reacted to foreign industrial powers during the 19th century. That's all. Hope you'd enjoy.